The Stick Boys is brought to you by the Professional Bowhunter Society. You can find them at professionalbowhunters.org. Their slogan says it best, knowledge through experience. We are also brought to you by the Traditional Bowhunter Magazine. Created in 1989, Traditional Bowhunter Magazine has been a staple in the traditional archery community. When you get your subscription, make sure to put in Stick Boys in the coupon code to get a 7th free magazine with your yearly 6 issues. That helps them out, that helps us out, and it helps them to know how many people we're sending over. So give them a look. You won't regret it.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Stick Boys. Tonight, we got our good buddy Alan Altizer back on. What's happening, buddy?
Not much. It's been out enjoying this mid-November.
Yep, it is that time of year, isn't it?
It is.
Well, we're going to do another woodsmanship tonight, and we've been dropping a lot of these, but people seem to like them. We personally love them, so that's what we're doing. And we had some requests to do woodsmanship episodes specific to the rut. So that's kind of what we're going to dive into tonight. Earlier in the week, you and I were talking quite a bit about this, and you mentioned something that I thought was really interesting, and it's something that is not talked about a lot, but you were talking about different types of bucks during the rut, meaning some bucks are rovers, some bucks are homebodies. And I thought that was a pretty good angle to take on this. So why don't you explain what you mean by the roving bucks versus homebody bucks during the rut?
All right. Well, throughout the podcast, I've referenced this probably since the very first one that, you have to look at it from a standpoint of what type of buck am I hunting. The roving buck, which is the bucks that end up, especially here during the rut, set up a junket route, as I call it, the party route that, the circular route that they'll travel. And I mean, these things, they may go 5 miles on it. And, they travel a circuit looking for does. And then you have, especially some of your older bucks that find core areas and hold in those core areas. And the more pressure gets on them, the more they utilize these core areas. Now, with these bucks, that hold the core area, he may have 3 or 4 core areas. He may stay in one area for, 3-4 days, 5 days a week. And if he runs out of does or doesn't have does in the area, he may move at night or during the day to another core area and, then take up residence there. And some of the influences on why they do this is, population, terrain, and the buck-doe ratio. For example, your mountain bucks, low density, very few does. Those bucks tend to run more of a route in the mountains. They tend to move more, from pocket to pocket and running a route. That's why, like even talking with Nathan, the 4 or 5 days and not seeing a deer, he may only be through there once every, week coming through there. Because the does just aren't there. If you go to your agricultural areas, your low-lying areas, your woodlot areas and all, it may be higher doe densities. And so those bucks don't have to travel as far, your older bucks, and they know that. Mm-hmm. And then as pressure gets on and pushes more and more into these little core areas, and as I've spoken of before, that's why I pay so close attention to pods of does. Where are my groups of does at? Where are they bedding at? And, these bucks will move from, little core area to core area. And the hunting pressure will reduce the area that these deer are hiding in. So you can really take advantage of that. Mm-hmm. So, and with your roving bucks, a lot of times they can't stay in one of these core areas because the maybe the bigger, more dominant buck it's in there, they may run them out. So they may run through, or a doe may not be in heat, and then he's going to move to the next. So he'll be running the junket route. So, that's the two different type of deer that, you hunt deer in the rut. You have your rovers, and then you have your bucks that stay in these core areas. For me, the very, very best is to have both worlds, to where I know junket routes are at, travel routes that either between resident bucks that maybe jump from one pod to the other, one core area, or these same routes that the rovers are using. So when I can find where the junket routes pass through these core areas, man, that's a place to kill a buck at. And there's several different influences there. And one of the big things there is competition in those areas. Mm-hmm. And because, they get careless, the more competition that's going on.
Okay. So when you're talking about the junket routes, it being a good place to kill a buck, are you talking about specifically the roving buck, or are you talking about both the roving and the homebody?
Primarily the roving bucks on the big junket routes. But, that same route that those bucks are traveling safely through, one of your big core area bucks are going to utilize those same travel routes a lot of times, maybe even on a day-to-day, almost on a linear travel pattern. Mm-hmm. So a lot of those spots, are conducive for each of the different types of bucks to use, because it's the safest route for them. So when you can find those spots, they're fantastic ways. But the big travel patterns, I'm talking more about the roving bucks. And a lot of times, you'll be sitting on stand, and, I've sat there in a day and watched, 15, 20 bucks literally come through in a day. It may be a spike, maybe a button buck, it may be a little 8-point, it may be a nice Pope and Young coming down the trail. You never know. And, mm-hmm. Creek bottoms, river bottoms, or mountains, you don't know what's coming down them.
Let me think of how I want to ask this question. Right now, I think a lot of parts of the country are starting to kind of get into lockdown, in some areas, meaning the does they're in, the bucks are usually, going to stick tight to a doe. They're not traveling as much per se looking for does. They're traveling with the does, trying to keep an eye on them. How do you approach that aspect? But let's just say you're going hunting. Alan's going to go hunting this weekend, and the does are totally locked down. Are you going to just stick to known areas for doe groups, or what's your approach on that?
Well, it depends where you're hunting. And again, the buck doe ratio, if you have a 1-to-1 ratio, those bucks have to work a whole lot harder for a doe. Mm-hmm. If you have, like some of the areas around here, you have 1 buck to 30 does, he doesn't have to work hard. Right. So when he finds, a group of a half dozen does, these does a lot of times will kind of synchronize their cycles. They'll all come in pretty close in the same age group. So a buck can get in one area, and, he can stay right there and breed. If you have, again, low population or low ratio, the bucks have to be out moving. So you have to look at that in the area that you're hunting. The apex of breeding, basically, for the most part, probably runs November 10th, 12th through the 18th to the 20th for most of the country. Mm-hmm. I think like Ohio, I don't remember if it's the 15th or 17th peak breeding. Here, it's somewhere, around this time now, 16th, 17th, 18th. So like here right now with so many does, I know these bucks can find a group of does, move into it, and he can stay pretty happy for the next week. And like one of the studies that I remember is that a buck, he'll go in, he's got a doe, and once he breeds her once or twice, he moves on. He doesn't stay with her. He moves on because his whole thing's spreading his genetics. That's what genetically he does. And so, and then the other bucks may pick her up, but the first buck or two that breeds her is the one that actually, fertilizes her. Right. So, like here now, we've had muzzleloader going on. It went out, goes out tomorrow, but we've had 2 weeks of a lot of people in the woods. That pressure condenses your deer down. It moves it into more safe pockets, more core areas. Your does, therefore your bucks are going to be hitting these. And so like right now, and I feel this way anywhere with the deer in the rut. The rut is all about hunting the does. That it's all about it because the bucks are hunting the does, and so that makes sense. They're what I'm focusing on. And so like here right now, and again, I hunt woodlot, open, grown up, basically CRP, grown up fields. It's not CRP here, but, old farm pastures and all, woodlots, 10, 20, 30 acres, whatever. And lots of grown up stuff, grown up bottoms, grown up draws. I look where these doe pods, historical areas that I know these does live and hide in, because that's where my bucks are coming in. Some of my bigger, more dominant bucks move into these areas and stay right with these does. He'll have a half dozen does in there. He may have 10 does there, in a 20-acre area. They will stay in there. And then the second thing that happens is the roving bucks, they're periodically coming through there and checking these does out. They can smell a doe in heat from a half mile away. If the wind's right, they'll pick them up. And and anywhere that doe walks, he'll follow that residual scent and find her. So, you have a lot of the roving bucks that are just traveling from these pod to pod. So I try to find these core areas and I zero in on those. Now, with that, like right now, if I find a buck that's using with a group of does, and very well, this is what I've been doing the last, week, 2 weeks, that I'm zeroing in on that thing and I go for broke on him. I mean, I don't get stupid with him, but I move in and get aggressive with him. And I'll do that. And, I was lucky enough this weekend, I killed her. So really cool buck, rattled him.
You did.
I shot him I shot him like 5 yards. People say you can't rattle deer in Tennessee. Yeah. Me and Gabe's had a heck of a time this last week rattling in deer, but it's got to be under the right circumstances. Now and I'll talk about this deer because this exemplifies. I've got a core area that I've got a really good buck using. Nobody hunts this property. The lady that owns it won't let them hunt it. Nobody hunts it. And the adjacent property that we can hunt, he frequents that area. I've actually passed the buck up now 3 times. It's a nice 11 point. And I'm wanting Gabe to get a crack at him, and he almost killed him the other night. But what we started seeing, this buck's using a core area with a group of does. There's another one to the north of their core area, and one of the main roving routes actually comes in from the north that these bucks will travel. And what I've seen, and I've talked about this before, as the rut, moves in, these bucks push their areas out and their areas start overlapping. Aaron's spoken of this, finding where these bucks' territories overlap. All at once there last week, I started finding rubs. Gabe and I would literally walk out in the evening, and when we come back in the morning, there were rubs up as high as my armpit, fresh rubs that night. And we started seeing this scrapes, trees broken, not just rub, but broken and twisted up. And that's a sign of the frustration. When we saw this coming in from the north and it kept creeping to the south, to the south, to the south on this 11 points territory, we knew there's a buck overlapping right there. And that competition point, I've got three things. It's the competition point, it's where the 11 points using, and it was where the overlap buck was using it. All that competition, that was the competition hub. Everything came together. The roving route, the two territorial routes, and you could just see all this exploding. This place, the biggest tree in there, maybe 12, 14 inches in diameter. I had a tree stand, I could get it 5 feet up into a tree with a backstop of cedar. I went in there, had several does come through, including the piebald doe we've been watching. She came through, watched 3 other bucks come through this thicket. And then I heard over on the far ridge, I heard a buck grunting. And when I did, I hit the horns together, and it sounded like I told you a motorcycle trying to tear through that thicket. And he ran in 5 yards, tore up 3 trees, and he finally gave me a hole to shoot him in. But again, what I did with that is I recognize I've got overlapping core areas, basically a roving travel route, just a cool little place that they're traveling through. And that's where I set up. And it's one of the worst places in the world you'll ever try to set. I call it the Barry Wenzel tree stand, where like he hunts with a ghillie suit 4 feet up in the tree. But it's the same thing. And the thing was, it's the only tree there. It's the only place to kill them that I knew for sure these deer, it's just a tiny little crease. And this is where hunting pressure really helped me, because the outside hunting pressure in the big woodlots and along the edge of the field, these deer are picking up all this scent from everybody else. And it pushed these deer into these tight little ribbons that they're safe, that everybody will look at this and say, there is no earthly way to hunt this. Well, Barry and Gene say it all the time, you don't pick your spot because of the tree, you pick the tree because of the spot. Yeah. And that's what it did. And, and if I'd had to shoot him off the ground, I'd have been sitting in a honeysuckle pile. But I was luckily able to get up. So here during the rut, I'm seeing all these different factors, the hunting pressure, the groups of does, where they're at, the travel routes that, the junket route that they're following, then these overlap, and just take advantage of it. This rut is 2 weeks, 3 weeks maybe, so when you find something like that, that buck may be just here 2 to 3 days in this area. So you better jump on it. You better jump on it.
So what about if you have a buck, and that's the situation? You have a buck and he's in the area for 2 or 3 days or what have you, and then he disappears. Okay. So now there's not a hot doe in the specific area that you're hunting. Do you ever come back to that spot in 28 days when there's a chance that there was a doe that didn't get bred and she's coming back into estrus, and try to catch him on the second swing, if you want to call it that?
Yeah, I do that a lot, and but I'll continue. Not all the does come in at the same time. Right. I mean, there's some, we had, I think I may have sent you the photos. I've got a friend at the last of October got trail cams of a buck breeding a doe. He got photos of that, So there's some that come in some of the older ones in particular come in earlier. But it'll be spread out. Some of them will be coming on up. And and that may be spaced out over 2 weeks to a month. And the thing is, like I said, now is the apex of breeding, right? Right around this 4 or 5 days in the middle of the month here.
Mm-hmm.
But again, when we go into lockdown, the more does, the worse the buck-doe ratio is. A lot of times, the stronger the lockdown is on your bigger bucks.
Mm-hmm.
Your 2.5-year-olds, 1.5-year-olds, maybe 3.5-year-olds if you've got them. They may be up moving if 4 and 5-year-olds are with the bucks. As many does as we've got here, my big bucks can be locked down. My 2.5-year-old bucks can be locked down. The 3.5-year-olds. So, excuse me. But the best times, really, to me, is that the leading into the apex and after you come out of it. That's why really, to kill the biggest bucks here with the ratios that are so far out of whack, and not very many bucks, is usually Thanksgiving, that week around Thanksgiving and after.
Right.
And what happens, there's less and less does. The heat is coming, the does and heat are coming off and are reducing. And at that, these bucks have to get out and hunt. So what happens there, you start having these big bucks that have been living in these core areas with a group of does. He's run out of ladies right there. So he may be up and moving. He may move out and move into, the next pod. Let's go check them out. And that may be, just a quarter mile over the ridge, and it may be a half mile down the road. It may be, or further. And then like times like that where we don't have very much agriculture, a cornfield down here a mile, cornfield there. A lot of times these bucks will leave out and they'll go down around these feed areas where these does are looking for them, and you catch them moving more during daylight at that time. Mm-hmm. So now he may be coming back into that core area. Some of my biggest bucks that I've killed here, that's how I've killed them, catch them coming in late, getting back, late into these core areas, and I'd catch them just coming into there. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
No, it does. It does. It absolutely does. So let's change gears a little bit. Let's say a guy is hunting public ground where there's competition with other hunters. What strategy would you use if you weren't hunting the woodlots, if you were hunting either big timber with other people or management areas, what have you? In other words, I guess what I'm asking is, how do bucks manage to search for these does and still stay safe? And how does a guy capitalize on other people hunting public areas to try to ultimately capitalize on catching a buck roaming?
There's 3 different things I use there. I either find access in from the backside on some areas, like one area I can think of, I come in from a boat and get down. Mm-hmm. So everybody's coming in from the parking lots and from the roads and all, push deer towards the lake. Mm-hmm. And so I'll use the topographical features, keep moving there. Most of them don't get walked that far down. So I get a lot of natural movement in there. Mm-hmm. That's one way where I let the hunting pressure move the deer to me. But one of the, or another way I like there, I look right along, especially public roads, train track, anything that goes through the public land. Mm-hmm. That, people just don't think about hunting. Like I said, some of the best places to kill the biggest bucks are within sight of the parking lots.
Yep.
And, steep roads running through the national forest with steep bluff coming off above it, that people don't drop down over the edge, or they just, like, nah, I know it, there's no deer there. It's too close to the highway. It's amazing, some of the bucks. And I think in Ohio, a place I hunt there, that, maybe the biggest buck I've ever seen in Ohio, that's exactly, I know what he was doing. He was laying in just off of a public road on the public and dropping off into private and going down some alfalfa fields doing. But that's one area. And then, like Nathan, you just move back in where the deer are still going to act like deer. I've got a good friend here, nicknamed Turtle. His name's David Lund. And I actually let him have one of my Robertson recurves here 3 years ago, and got him started shooting trad. Well, he's one of the best mountain hunters I know. He may be the best mountain hunter I know. And just kills some tremendous deer here. But he goes up high on the mountain and finds these little pockets. 50 yards, 100 yards across, little pockets right under the ridge, a little flat or kind of leveled out inside of laurel thickets. And he hunts those and he kills, just some, incredible bucks in these places off the ground. He hunts strictly off the ground. And, that's how Turtle hunts. Mm-hmm. Nathan does the same thing. Turtle hunts steep and he finds these little topographical features and he moves into them, and he loves it. Nasty, rainy days is when he does it. And he won't hardly hunt out of the tree stand. And that's how he kills all of his bucks. And so I like that approach too, like him and Nathan, move back to where these roving bucks and in the mountains, again, these bigger, older, mature bucks, there's not that many does for them. They've got to move some.
Right.
So
in essence, you're basically, when you're dealing with pressure on public ground or heavily hunted areas, you're basically hunting the rut just like you're hunting before the rut. You're going to where other people aren't, and where deer are still going to act like deer, or where deer are going to congregate because there's too much activity in another place. Yeah. And the bucks are going to follow the does there.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And see, like in the land where I hunt, that's not on public, it's like I said, the more pressure, the better I like it, because it concentrates my numbers. Mm-hmm. It concentrates the deer. And then I know those spots that other people just, they don't think about.
Right.
When I look at something, think, yep, no way a deer can be there, that 9 times out of 10, I'll turn around and go back and look at that spot and get surprised.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's change gears again and let's talk about the second rut, or the false rut, the late rut, whatever you want to call it. Because to me, that's almost kind of like the October lull. Everybody's got their theories on it. I guess from a biological standpoint, it's does that didn't get bred and they're breeding later. But how does your strategies change later? Like, I don't want to say post rut, but as the rut's winding down, what do you do differently?
Rut.
Yeah.
Well, like when you drop into December or January, right now these bucks will burn probably 20% of the body weight off. Mm-hmm. All right. So one of the things you have to do, look where your food sources are, for 2 reasons. The bucks have to replenish, but as the food diminishes, all your green browse is gone, so they can be feeding on clover and stuff in the field. But the trees, everything on there, the browse that they eat from the trees and all, they've lost that food source. The majority of the acorns are, the white oaks and all, they've eaten those up. So now they're dropping back to what red oaks, what they can find, start eating a lot of lichens off the trees and mushrooms. And so I look then, where are the food sources? Because, the bucks are going to need this, but the does need it. So the doe, again, the rut hunt is about finding the does. accessible does for the buck. So if they're accessible, he's got to have cover with it. He's got to have protection. and one of the things that I started looking at years ago, you see bucks tending late, and a lot of it's the younger does. The yearlings they were born last spring, their first heat that they're coming in, first estrus cycle there. So the bucks are chasing those. So, as I call it, road hunting, I'm out and glassing all the time, just seeing. And I think of property here that, I have no permission whatsoever to hunt, but I'll glass that every opportunity. I look at it every evening coming home, every time I go through. Gabe and I get out and just drive these properties and look, because I may have a half mile down the road somewhere that I can hunt. Mm-hmm. And some of these bucks will still do, a roving route. He'll still, the junket routes, these circular routes that they travel, but more so that where they don't want to burn energy, they start picking up as a core area with these does. Now the mountains, he's going to have to move more. He's going to have to find these does and all. But how during December, the does start herding up. They start yarding up. Mm-hmm. So your bucks will stay in proximity to those animals a lot of times and move back. You'll see them right in feeding, with them and bedding with them and just waiting for the next lady. So late, I look for the does, of course, and the easiest way to find the doe in late season is find the food. And we've all talked about it. And Aaron tells you that's one of his favorite times because they go back to more of the junket route. For the most part, all of them go back to linear travel patterns, back and forth to food because they want the least expenditure of energy for the most gain, from food, for the most caloric gain.
Right.
And so, especially colder weather, the colder it gets. But, that buck, as long as he's got horns on his head, he's going to be looking for a doe.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. One of the reasons that the hunting the rut is so effective is buck. They let their guard down. They make mistakes, and it makes it easy to capitalize. When you're talking about an animal that almost never makes mistakes, there's a small window where they're going to get a little foolish. So why don't you tell us about some of the experiences you've had as far as some of the things that you've seen bucks do during the rut that you would never see. And then maybe we can, kind of glean a little bit of how to capitalize on stuff like that.
Well, first of all, they start letting you know they're in the area. You have all the rubs, you have the scrapes blowing up. And so then where you'll think that, there hadn't been a buck in here in 100 years. And then all at once, this place blows all to heck with buck sign. And you're like, who is here? Where are these ghosts at? Where's the den these things are living in? And the reason that's happening is competition. The competition for does. And, you remember being a teenager, you get pretty stupid over girls sometimes, and it's no different with the deer. A lot of times, the only time some of these big bucks, and I will say some, make a mistake is when they've got a doe in heat. But the older, the smarter they get, the less they push the does. They like to just keep their distance, let her remain comfortable where she's at until she's ready to breed. But they do make mistakes. One of the things is that, they're wanting to find a doe so badly, they get out and they start moving. They get out and they move more during the daylight, even in their core area.
Mhm.
And one of the things with that too, they've got to feed more. People say they don't eat. No, you watch a big buck, even tending a doe, he will be eating during that time because there's so many caloric energy. There's so much of the calories that are burned up during that time. He's trying to replenish. So he has to sustain himself more so during then. So there's a lot of factors that play into that. But one of the things I think happened, they become so focused on that doe and so focused on keeping other bucks out of the area or away from that doe that somewhat of a tunnel vision. And I think we were talking about it, a podcast back about, during a tactical situation, how tunnel vision, we tend to become, and people will see that even when they're trying to shoot a deer with a bow, how little that deer gets or whatever.
Yeah.
But it just, they tend to be so focused. They're not as focused on the outside, but they're not, for the most part, they're not stupid. I've had a few that's looked at me, caught me drawing, but they were so preoccupied they really didn't pay a whole lot of attention to me even drawing my bow.
Mhm.
And that may be because they're seeing so much movement going on around them with other bucks and the does. They become complacent to movement. I don't know. But, sometimes their focus is so intense on that doe, you get by with a whole lot. But you let them get a nose full and you're in trouble.
Yeah,
Now,
sure.
one of the things I told you the other night, we were talking, I would tell you about, I think it was Sunday evening.
Mm-hmm.
Gabe and I went hunting, and we were after this 11 point. And just before it was, I think our shooting light was at about 5:48 that night when we had our shooting time. Was when we had to quit legally hunting. And about 5:30, 5:35, Gabe spotted the buck. And we were watching two other deer I'd seen. And we're hunting a big, big valley that heads out in front of us. And so we could see this bowl way up above us. We're on a west ridge, on the eastern side of the west ridge at the top. There's a ridge to the east of us that goes way back down, and like I said, on this lady's property. And it's thick, and it's nasty thick. And I knew it's where the buck was bed, and we'd seen him come out of there several times.
Mm-hmm.
And this buck come out, we had a nose wind hit us, blowing from the west, hitting us, blowing to the east. Well, that buck got out of bed. He walked with a nose wind, with that west wind up that ridge, got to a point, and up above us, there's about 40 acres of woods, a block of woods.
Mm-hmm.
The woods basically went from ridge top to ridge top. He's on the east ridge. When he got down where a fence line that was in front of us went directly parallel, he cut that corner and went diagonal up. He was going all the way from the east side to the west corner of that woods, but he was down off of it going diagonal. And what he was doing was scent checking that whole block of woods
Mm-hmm.
from a quarter mile away. He was scent checking the whole before he went into it. And he was going all the way across from the east side diagonal, where he was going to end up at the woods on the west side corner. Well, when I saw, and I told Gabe that's exactly what they were going to do. And if we saw him, if he didn't come across in front of us on our property, I'd try to call him in. Well, when he came out of that bottom, going up onto the ridge we were on, I grunted at him. got his attention, roared at him, get his attention. He turned. I did 3 or 4 tending grunts, and he came 100 miles an hour straight towards us. When he got almost to us, the fence line that was in front of us had grown up heavy cedars, and when he dropped behind it, he's running with a tailwind through, and there's 2 fields. Theirs is grown up, but the one he was running through, like I said, looks like CRP, but he could see while he was running 50 yards or so from that fence line. When that buck got into a low area that he could not see on the other side of that fence line on this open ridge we were on, he stopped. He ran back to where he came in from. He couldn't travel back to go try to circle around us without a tailwind. So he turned and he went back up to the west, jumped the fence, and started circling around to get below us. Mm-hmm. So my whole point is, this buck's in the middle of the rut, but they ain't stupid. That was one of the most impressive things I've ever seen a white-tailed deer do, and they do it all the time. But we were fortunate enough, and my son was fortunate enough to see how that deer used. He got out of his bed using nose wind. I've talked about destination points. His destination points, these oak flats he was going to. He cut diagonal across it, and he was actually going in to the far corner of it so he could scent check that whole block of woods before he got in. And he was actually had some does with him that had come out earlier. And then when we called him in, when he lost his sense of smell, come running at us with the nose wind, when he lost his eyes at that point, he stopped. He didn't.
He shut her down. Right.
Yeah. And I told Gabe if we had some cedars cut out in that fence line, he would have ran straight to us. Yeah. But we didn't. But, don't ever think, a lot of times people think that they can get by with things because it's the rut. Again, use the basic, everything, the little details, look at, you use them to your advantage because he sure as heck's going to.
Yeah.
And so, again, this buck, the way he scent checked the destination point, which you've heard me talk about over and over, long range scent surveillance, he was still using it. I'm sure that buck was, when he diagonal across that woodlot, he was checking that woodlot for hunters, but he was also checking it for does. Mm-hmm. The does he was with, he already knew their status, but he's looking for others up in there too. Yeah. So that's how much they use it. And, that's, and Gabe and I, when he popped the fence over us, we were 5 minutes from shooting time. And I was like, grab your stuff, let's go. And he's like, why? He may come back in. I was like, he won't be here before dark because he's going to come through this thicket. And I don't want him to get downwind and smell us. So as soon as he went over the crest of that ridge, I knew what he was going to do. He was going to circle us. We took off. We grabbed their gear and went as hard as we could go out of there. Mm-hmm. Because he's a nice 11 point. I really want Gabe a crack at him, but I don't want him, knowing that we were there. And so the next time I go in, and I don't know if I said it when I grunted, when he ran back up to the east, I actually hit the horns, and that's when he went up and decided to circle to the west. Mm-hmm. So, but the next time I told Gabe we go in, we're using different grunt calls, and we're going to use a different set of antlers. Because he heard that once.
He's hard to
wasn't sure. So, and maybe not. And if he's crazy enough over doe, it won't make a bit of world of difference. Mm-hmm. But if he's still thinking like he was other night, it just might.
Right. That's awesome. Man, that's a lot of food for thought, and that's a lot of information. And, we've mentioned it before, but that's definitely one of the episodes that I'm looking forward to, even after I edit it, to go back and listen to it again and try to get all that processed processed in my head. But that's a ton of information, and we really appreciate it as always.
Oh, glad to.
And we do have a lot of really good questions that folks have been sending in. I've got a list built, and we're going to try to get you and Nathan on for a Q&A. And if any way possible, we're going to try to get Aaron on as well. But his schedule is kind of tight. He's got a lot going on with work and hunting. So, guys, listeners out there, just kind of be patient with us. We're working on that. But we do have we will. We need to. We got a really good list, and we got some questions specifically for Aaron as well. So hopefully we can make that work. In the meantime, if anybody has any more questions, man, send them in, because we're going to get to as many as we can. We'll try to rapid fire them. That way we can get to as many questions as possible. But we've got some good ones, and I got a lot of questions I want to ask myself, but I'm trying to let this be more for, listener Q&A. So, but there's a lot of good ones in there. So we're looking forward to getting that one done. And
that'll be fun. It's fun being with those two.
Oh yeah,
it's
absolutely.
A lot of fun.
Absolutely.
It's funny. We're talking about Q&A. After that happened to me and Gabe with that buck the other night, the two of us had been just firing questions back and forth about what if. And it took us, till the next evening to really figure out everything that buck did that night and the why he did it.
Yeah.
And Gabe after we talked about it, he said, yeah, but that's exactly what you said they would be doing beforehand. And it was, but just getting to see it.
Right.
And that when you see a buck, even during the rut like this, ask yourself, why is he doing it? What advantages there are? Because you may learn something about that buck's personality.
Mm-hmm.
And especially an older buck, you'll learn, if you can figure out one or two of those little quirks about him, man, that puts you a leg up on killing him.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So,
well, I think you hit the nail on the head too when you mentioned that, deer or bucks do that all the time, but you don't always get to see it. And in most situations, you may have caught a glimpse of that buck and you wouldn't have been able to put all that together. But since you were able to watch it and see all of that transpire, you gain a lot of knowledge from that.
And for my 12-year-old to see it, I mean, that's been the highlight probably of both of their seasons so far.
Mm-hmm. So, a fella could study whitetails his entire life, and you'll still never know everything. So,
oh no,
they're just amazing animals. But hopefully we'll get a good picture with Gabe here before too long.
I hope so.
And we've all got our things going on right now. Everybody's, the whole crew is knee deep in it, and everybody's got some good stuff working. So we're hoping that things will pan out. And in the meantime, like I said, if anybody has any more questions, man, send them in, because, we'll get to all the ones that we can. So thanks for listening. We appreciate it. And I think little Clementine is still growing like a weed. So maybe Dalton can get back on here soon, but he's been pretty tied up and he's doing more important things than talking about deer hunting. So
definitely
gotta do the daddy thing. So, man, we appreciate it, buddy, and look forward to talking to you soon, man.
All right, buddy. God bless.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Alan.